Hello, Team Basecamp. Hey, Coach Tim here with a new NerdCast on supercompensation and the role of rest. Let's start out with a little definition. In sports science theory, supercompensation refers to the post-training period during which the trained parameter was a higher performance capacity than it did prior to the training period. So that I actually like that definition. There's a complexity to it, even just reading it out loud. Like it's like, huh? And basically, it's saying that your capacity has improved due to training. You are down here and you end up here, right? I like that idea because super compensation is how we get there. It's much more understandable in a visual format. Let's do a little X and Y axis chart here. So we have performance on the Y and time on the X. So as we go this way, time goes by, and as we go up, um, performance improves. So we have an athlete, Joe or Jane Ryder, we're just going to call them Ryder, and they have a baseline performance and they start out. They introduce some training stimuli. Performance actually goes down during training. And typically, this is true. Even though it might not feel like you might be doing okay, your performance is going down because you're introducing work, which results in fatigue, right? You're getting tired. And then at some given time, you start to recover, you rest, you take time off. And once you rest, your performance goes up, up, up. And it actually goes into a phase of super compensation where it gets higher than where it was before. And then if you don't start working out again, it actually goes away. That's kind of like a common view of it. So let's talk about it from the human perspective because it'll set up why this is so important. So the baseline performance, a good physiological term for that is homeostasis. If you're just hanging out, you're not doing anything crazy. Your body always wants homeostasis. It wants to be in a very settled, happy place, right? So you've been hanging out for a couple of months on the couch, not unfit. You've been kind of active. And your homeostasis for performance is X. It's not bad, but it's kind of down here, right? It's a little lower. So then you're like, I'm going to get in shape. I'm going to exercise. So you introduce some training stimuli, hopefully the optimal training stimuli. And what you're doing to the human system, is you're disturbing that homeostasis through the introduction of stress or strain stimuli, right? You're adding work. You're making that nice, happy little system work. And it's like, oh, I don't want to work, right? And you're introducing, so what you're doing is you're disturbing the homeostasis. Once you rest a little, your body wants to get back to homeostasis again, but it has memory. It understands that you disturbed it and it wants to be more ready for that disturbing in the future. So it achieves it does return to a homeostasis, a more settled time period during supercompensation. But that's a new and improved homeostasis. It's a slightly better you, right? So your homeostasis was here and now it's up here. That's pretty much how compensation to all training driven by the super compensation model happens. But one of the things I want to communicate, so it's because it's so crucial to understand the role of rest, this little sneaky thing in the middle here, right? When you're disturbing homeostasis, that is a signal, not a response. Training stimuli, right? That disturbing of homeostasis is a signal. And it is a signal of trauma. It is a distress signal. It is a suffering signal, right? It's not a warm and fuzzy, come get a hug kind of signal. Because think about what's happening. You're putting your body under stress or strain. It's disturbed and under load, and it's saying, ow, this is disturbing. You're doing micro trauma to your muscles. You're basically scrambling your cardiovascular system. You're introducing a whole bunch of fatigue. And the way your body, the first step of the response to that, the way your body responds is it sends a distress signal. We need to get better. We need to make improvements if we're going to withstand this disruption. Then this return supercompensation, that is a response. It's not a signal, it's a response. Once the body hears, or your systems would be better, but let's call it your body, hear the signal, the alarm bell, the distress signal has gone off, it's going to marshal its resources and respond to that signal by building a new, better, stronger you. But here's what's so important. People miss this simple relationship. Your body cannot hear the signal or respond to the signal unless rest is present. You must stop ringing the alarm bell, right? And rest to allow the body to respond optimally to the signal. And I think this way, I love explaining it this way, signal and response, signal and response. And it's not quite this simple, but it's a good understanding. Rest is what the communication vehicle is. The signal doesn't really get heard, and it certainly doesn't get optimally responded to unless you rest. So if you don't rest, all you do is keep ringing the distress bell. Like imagine you're somewhere and you're in distress and you're ringing the bell, hoping for help, and the help never comes. Eventually, you just get exhausted and hopeless, and you no one's going to save me, nothing's going to get, and you stop ringing the bell, and I guess, I don't know, you fall asleep, you pass out, right? You overtrain, you stagnate, you underperform. You never get to this phase because you can send all the signal you want, but if the body can't hear it or respond to it, if it doesn't have the energy to do those two, which only comes when you rest, not only, but mainly comes when you rest, it's not going to respond the way you want. You can just keep ringing the bell. There's lesson number one. Take that one home as you kind of think about skipping rest weeks and skipping rest time periods. Now you understand why it might not be the best idea in its simplest terms. Now, if we want to get this concept of supercompensation right, and with the understanding I've just given you, we have two elements we want to talk about, right? We have optimal training load. How much load do we put into that cycle? And we also need to think about optimal training timing. How long do we keep loading, and when do we rest? Well, the answer is one of Goldilocks. We need to find the right elements. So let's start with timing, actually. It's a little easier to lay this one out. So when we think about timing, and I show this nice little chart, I guess I could have animated this, but you still get the idea. It makes it look like, oh, this is one perfect block, like same blocks of time. Like this is a week, this is a week, and this is a week. No, the wave is really just meant to demonstrate a principle. When we think about time and we use a bell curve of humans, the average human, and not everybody fits in that bell curve, but on the same side, a lot of people do. And when we use this idea of training, which is pretty predominant, 3 weeks on and 1 week off, that fits probably 70 to maybe even a little more percentage of the universe pretty darn well. And we can use that as a starting point. So if we think about this idea of training, of timing, of optimal training timing, we can think about the cycle, like any cycle of our training, cycle 1 or cycle 2, we use 4-week blocks in general. We tweak them a little here and there. So you could think like week 1, 2, 3, there's the optimal loading. And in each week, we're disturbing the system a little more, right? We're adding stress and strain to disturb the homeostasis a little more and a little more. And when we get to what we think is generally an optimal time period, we flip over to recovery week, and it's not really a full week. Even though this phase looks longer, recovery occurs faster, particularly the more fit you get, right? The more CTL, the more training you do, the more you train, the more you can train because you recover faster. So this makes it look like, wow, I'm recovering forever, right? I'm only training a small amount of time. So I'm just trying to block it out. Week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4. And we want to get through week 4. The idea here is we're timing. We want to move on when we're at the peak of supercompensation so we can carry that new and improved me into another cycle, right? That's timing. Now let's talk about optimal training load. Go back to this idea again, and it's more important probably here in loading than timing, the Goldilocks impact. Now, three three people, right? Three athletes going through this idea of supercompensation. Let's start with ideal here in green. We introduce the right amount of training load over the right time. We trigger our good, deeper recovery. Remember, it doesn't have to be as long as the training load, but when we rest, we rest. Rest means rest. And we get optimal supercompensation from that correct load. And timing is part of that too, even though this is load based. Now, if you don't add enough training load, you miss workout days, you skip a couple, you're only training, a couple of days a week or something like that, you're not getting to the optimal training load, you still will have some supercompensation when you rest, but it's not optimized. The one we see the most, the one we absolutely see the most is we add too much stimuli for too long, and then we rest too little. We only put a little recovery time. And the reality is, in that little bit of rest, or maybe just going easier for a day or whatever it is, you sort of kind of return back to the original performance baseline, maybe, but you never improve. You don't go through this idea of supercompensation. That's why if you are going to err, and we say it all the time, error on the side of a little too little, on a couple of watts less, on a little easier. Because once you start pushing into the red, you are significantly impacting your supercompensation. Your signal might be louder, but your ability to hear and respond to that signal is getting compromised. Now, one training cycle is not enough, right? I love it. Right? Hey, we have 4 weeks of training. We do it. We're totally super compensated and we're max, we're peak. The reality is what we need to do is really think about time and our equation. And we want to start, like we want to get back into training. Recovery should only be a short window, because as soon as we assume that new homeostasis, as soon as we're hopefully somewhere in the top of that supercompensation peak, our body has reestablished its new baseline. We want to repeat the system, right? We want to disturb that brand new homeostasis as quickly and as deeply as we should. That's what we do. So if we think about training over time and the theory of supercompensation, it looks like this. We go through a supercompensation cycle. We have our recovery. Hopefully we time it really, really well. We get to the peak of supercompensation. We drive down again. We recover. And each time we're stepping forward, this is such a great visual. It really helps us understand. And you could think about it this way, like there's your cycle 1, 2, and imagine 3 and 4 out here looking the same. And if we time this together well, that's where we optimize performance. So when people ask us in the Basecamp program, I want to move these 2 weeks over here and this week over here, you always need to think beyond the one cycle impact. How are you impacting the entire process of supercompensation over time? And that's why it's challenging to answer those questions in general, because you might say, I just want to move this 1 week from here to here, but it might impact 2 cycles or more based on how it impacts this rhythm. Homeostasis, disturb that homeostasis and set off the distress signal, right? Rest so the signal gets heard and responded to, then just keep repeating that. If you want optimal performance, that is what it looks like. Now, if you do it all cycles optimally, we should have some amount of growth. It won't be the same. Like you'll have one cycle that you'll really pop up a lot. And it depends what we're measuring. We only measure FTP, Fitness is about so much more. Conditioning is about so much more. Performance is about so much more. Remember, the y-axis was performance. But you should see an ongoing steady improvement of performance throughout base camp if we can stay in the super compensation styles. Now, you might have plenty of reason not to. You want to ski, you want to go fun, you want to do things that make you happy on the bike. That's cool too. Just understand the impact so you make good decisions. If we never rest and we always work too hard and we don't, this is what happens. Eventually we just drive, we never hear the signal, right? We never have the energy to hear the signal. We don't have the energy to respond to the signal, and eventually we overtrain. If you're not consistent and follow the rhythm, remember my pyramid: consistency, rhythm, and progression, right? This is what I'm talking about. You're consistent, not just getting to your training, but getting to your training in the rhythm we're laying out and progressing it forward. This is what happens. If you're good sometimes and not good some other, you still probably make some progress. It just won't be this ongoing and ideal end load. Now, can this be done? Here's a PMC from an athlete from last year's program that I knew who to look up. Here you see the blue is your chronic training load. This is a high volume training, 14-hour training plan. So it's a little steeper than yours probably looks. But look, you can see it. Cycle 1, rest. Cycle 2, rest. Cycle 3, rest. Cycle 4, rest, right? Optimal super compensation stacking. Homeostasis, disturb it, set off the distress signal, rest so your body hears and actually triggers response, and then repeat that process 4 different times. That's the secret. You can hear everything you want on the internet about secret workouts, new secret lactate testing, and new secret this and that. This will get you 98% of your peak performance capacity. Then worry about all those little secrets. Get this one right. If you're not doing this right and you're searching for the secret, that secret might actually be effective, but it's not going to work for you until you get this right. This is the foundation of performance. And again, that's choice. Your cycling might just be a fitness venue. You might have other things and other, goals that make you happy. If your goal is peak performance, there it is for you. Now, a little bit of individual advice, like how do I know, like a lot of times in the base camp program, that first cycle is a little longer, how we fit in around the holidays and stuff like that, always a challenging time of year. To me, when I'm working one-on-one with an athlete, what I'm looking for, because I don't run 3-to-1 with my pro athletes. We find their pattern a little better, but I need their feelings and feedback. When they start to develop consecutive days of DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness, like, man, I'm just feeling it in my legs for 3 to 4 straight days late in the cycle, that's one of the indicators to me. It's time to rest. I mean, don't get me wrong, you work hard, you always feel it for a little bit or for, a couple of hours or even a day, but then the next day's easier work. You're like, okay, I'm shaking that off. I feel good. 2 is a disturbed sleep pattern. I'm not sleeping well, or I'm sleeping 8-9 hours one night and then 4 hours the next night. I have disrupted hunger. Like some days I'm really hungry and the next days I'm not. That's a fatigue warning sign. Fatigue has interesting impacts on your appetite and bringing in fuel. It kind of crosses up the wires, a very simple way to say it. And then also I look for a suppressed heart rate under intensive aerobic load. Like your heart rate, because your heart tired, very simple explanation, your heart gets tired. And as a defense mechanism, it's slowing down because it's attempting to slow you down. Once we determine that, and then I use other metrics and data, don't get me wrong. Once we determine that, when do we know to get back on it, right? When do we get back on training? When do we start the next super compensation cycle? I'm looking for TSB positive trend. I'm not saying quite positive trend for about 3 to 5 days. It really is very dependent on their CTL, how fit they are in this window, in this acute little phase we're looking at. But I want to see it getting positive 3 to 5 days. I want it to be at or near or above 0 for at least 1 to 2 days. Again, that's CTL dependent. So I don't want to link it to a number. It's really more of a visual. And I'll go back to the chart in a moment. I want the DOMs to go away, and I want them to start sleeping well and resting heart rate, things like that, all recover. Now, when I was talking about this TSB at or near 0 for 1 to 2 days, you can see TSB in yellow here right? So look at this athlete's recovery periods. TSB, their fatigue is high, so their TSB is low. It kind of is, right? You can see it being positive for about 3 to 4 days. Bam, positive, time to get back at it. Bam, positive, time to get back on it. Visually, this is what I'm looking for. Coming out of cycle 4, they might have needed a little more rest. They kind of gray zoned that one a little bit, but I think you see it. Okay, everybody, that is today's NerdCast Super Compensation. Ask questions if you got it. Thanks for listening.